I've always believed that our minds are like intricate gardens, full of seeds that grow into the realities we live. But lately, I've started to realize that some of those seeds are menacing weeds, things we nurture without even noticing, whispering in the background of our daily lives, sabotage disguised as small, harmless habits. For me, one of those weeds was repetition, quietly, almost unconsciously, a habit I clung to every single day. It was a small voice inside that kept whispering, "You're not enough, you'll never have enough," or "This is just how things are." And I didn't see it for what it was, not at first. It was easy to dismiss it as just my inner critic, a common part of being human. But deep down, I knew it was something more, something that silently held me hostage. That persistent inner voice was, in reality, a barrier, a mental block that kept my potential locked away. What struck me most was how subtle it was. I could go through a whole day, feeling grateful for little things, my family, my health, my small wins, and still, behind the scenes, a tiny voice would creep in. It would find a way to remind me of my shortcomings, my financial struggles, or the opportunities one felt I had missed. I started to pay more attention to these moments, those quiet internal complaints, judgments, or resentments I would harbor without even realizing. What was I really doing when I replayed the same negative stories about money in my mind? It's strange how a simple thought, repeating itself day after day, can become a wall, an invisible barrier keeping abundance just out of reach. I noticed that every time I caught myself murmuring those familiar words, "I can't afford that," or "I'll never get out of debt," it felt like I was reinforcing an unspoken contract that I was doomed to struggle. But then a question arose in me, silent but insistent. Could these small mental acts, these tiny daily habits of complaining or doubting, really shape my reality? Could they block my prosperity the same way that a heavy chain might? It didn't seem logical, yet I knew in my gut that words, thoughts, and feelings have a frequency, a power to either attract or repel. I've read about the power of focus, of energy, even of consciousness. Still, somehow, I realized that what was happening was more personal, more visceral than abstract theories. This habit of internal complaining had become a shadow, something I carried with me into every financial decision, every opportunity, every dream. And isn't it easier to focus on what's lacking? Isn't it simpler to dwell on the obstacles than to see the abundance already present? I've been guilty of that, I admit. That habit of negativity, the tendency to focus on scarcity, felt so natural it almost seemed unavoidable. Every time I tried to build something positive, a small voice would say, "Is it really going to last?" Or "You don't have enough to begin with." Or worse, "You're wasting your time." These thoughts crept in like thieves, stealing my hope just when I was almost ready to believe in possibilities. It made me wonder, how much of what I've been experiencing, what most of us experience, comes from these tiny, hidden mental micro-battles? I've come to see that our minds are like fertile soil, and what we plant there influences everything else. When negativity grows unchecked, it chokes out the seeds of opportunity, growth, and money. But what happens if I start to tend that soil differently? What if I began to replace complaining with gratitude, suspicion with appreciation, doubts with trust? Could these small shifts really have the power to clear the way for fresh abundance? That's what I've been pondering. How a habit so seemingly insignificant, so small and ingrained, can be the biggest obstacle to financial prosperity. And how, conversely, simple choices, like consciously redirecting my thoughts, can plant the seeds for change. I've started to notice how these mental habits, when left unchecked, are like invisible locks preventing me from opening doors I desperately want to walk through. But I also see that within my control lies the ability to choose differently, to undo the damage of silent, repetitive negative thoughts. This realization shifted something inside me, quietly but powerfully. It's not about grand gestures or sweeping changes. It's about noticing what I'm really doing to myself every day, how I talk to myself in the quiet moments, and seeing if I can, just for today, choose a different story. Because maybe, just maybe, that's where the true revolution begins. In a simple act of internal awareness, a conscious decision to turn that whispers of doubt into songs of gratitude. And perhaps, in doing so, I'll find that prosperity isn't some distant, elusive thing, but something that begins with the way I speak to myself in the smallest, quietest moments. Every day, I notice how easily I fall into patterns of mental autopilot, routines that quietly set the tone of my reality, often without deliberate choice. These cycles of internal negativity act as subtle currents steering my feelings and decisions, shaping my financial landscape much more than I initially realize. The challenge lies in recognizing how much power these persistent thoughts hold, even when their influence seems invisible or negligible at first glance. It's as if invisible hands gently push my intentions into a direction rooted in doubt and scarcity rather than possibility and growth. Imagine the way a small crack in a dam gradually widens over time, allowing water to seep through and weaken the entire structure. That's precisely how negative inner dialogues function. Small, seemingly inconsequential words and judgments that, if left unchecked, start to erode the foundations of your confidence and financial flow. These mental fissures broaden when I neglect to replace them with conscious, empowering narratives. Over days, these cracks multiply, and suddenly, I find myself overwhelmed by a sense that abundance is just beyond reach, constantly slipping away because I didn't tend to the internal landscape with care. Furthermore, certain habitual thought patterns act as mental filters, distorting how I interpret new opportunities or setbacks. If I'm accustomed to focusing on limitations, I tend to scrutinize each opening through a lens of skepticism or fear. Instead of perceiving a new project as a chance to grow, I see it as a risk, an obstacle that might drain my resources or lead to failure. These mental lenses create a distorted reality, locking me into a cycle of hesitation that sabotages my progress before I even attempt to move forward. The key is understanding that these filters aren't fixed, they are malleable, shaped by ongoing internal dialogues. Recognizing this opens the door to rewiring my perception. Another aspect worth examining involves the underlying assumptions I unconsciously hold about my worthiness of financial success. Deeply embedded beliefs, sometimes inherited or reinforced through past experiences, serve as silent barriers. For instance, if I've internalized the idea that wealth is reserved for others, or that I'm inherently incapable of achieving prosperity, then my thoughts, even if unspoken, act as invisible magnets pulling me away from abundance. These core convictions influence my subconscious choices, steering me towards safe, familiar patterns that often include self-imposed limitations. Breaking free requires not just changing surface-level thoughts, but also addressing these foundational beliefs, something that demands honesty and patience. Now, consider how this awareness applies when I encounter setbacks or financial disappointments. When I face unexpected expenses or lost opportunities, it's tempting to spiral into feelings of frustration and self-criticism. Yet, I've learned that feeding that negativity only deepens the resistance I face. Instead, I can choose to see these moments as signals rather than failures, signals to reassess my approach and reinforce my commitment to a mindset of abundance. This shift transforms how I interpret life's fluctuations, viewing temporary obstacles as catalysts for growth rather than proof that prosperity eludes me. The truth is, nurturing a fertile mental environment involves more than just occasional positive affirmations. It's about consistently cultivating awareness and deliberately steering my thoughts toward validation and possibility. This process resembles tending a garden, selectively planting seeds of optimism, removing weeds of doubt, and providing nourishment through gratitude. When I focus on what is moving within my reach, resources I already possess, skills I continue to develop, I amplify feelings of empowerment. These feelings act as energetic embers, igniting a sense of receptivity that naturally attracts opportunities and resources. The more I reinforce this mental posture, the more resilient I become against the subtle sabotage ingrained in old habits. It's important to see that transforming internal narratives isn't about denying realities or suppressing authentic feelings, but about consciously choosing the stories I want to live by. Each time I catch myself drifting into negativity, I can pause, reframe, and replace those thoughts with ones rooted in appreciation for my current progress. Recognizing these mental patterns as choices rather than fixed traits grants me the autonomy to steer my thinking. Over time, this practice rewires my subconscious, gradually dissolving the inner barriers that once seemed immovable. As I witness the ripple effects of these shifts, more clarity, confidence, and openness, I'm reminded that personal mastery over thoughts is an active, ongoing journey. This awareness becomes a foundation for not just attracting prosperity, but cultivating a life aligned with my highest aspirations. Building on this, I realize that much of the internal resistance I experience stems from unconscious assumptions I carry about success. Deep beneath my conscious awareness, I've often believed that abundance requires extraordinary effort or endless sacrifice, which in turn creates a mental barrier that discourages chances for growth. When I hold these notions, I tend to view financial progress as a distant, almost impossible achievement rather than a natural extension of consistent, mindful actions. This subconscious picture shapes my actions and inhibits me from recognizing opportunities that align with my true potential. Recognizing these beliefs is a revelation. They are like shadows lurking in the corners of my mindset, influencing my decisions without me fully knowing. Only through deliberate introspection can I begin to lift those shadows, revealing the opportunities they concealed. Furthermore, I notice that habits of passive mental engagement, allowing distracting thoughts or worries to dominate my focus, directly weaken my capacity to attract resources. I might spend moments dwelling on fears of scarcity or regret, which drain my energy and narrow my outlook. Nonetheless, actively cultivating awareness about these mental habits acts as an antidote. I can develop a practice of observing my thoughts without judgment, as though I am a gardener gently pruning the branches of a wild tree. When I catch myself spiraling into pessimistic patterns, I can consciously redirect my attention. This act of mindful redirection is like shifting the gears of a vehicle, moving from a path of doubt to one of curiosity and possibility. Another layer to explore involves the stories I recount to myself about struggles and setbacks. These narratives, often built on past experiences or societal conditioning, tend to reinforce a sense of limitation. If I continue to focus on failures as evidence that I am destined to struggle, I am anchoring myself to an outdated blueprint that no longer serves me. Instead, I can choose to reframe those episodes, not as endpoints, but as learning curves in my journey toward abundance. Recognizing the storytelling power I possess allows me to rewrite my internal script, transforming "I failed" into "I gained valuable insight." This shift enlarges my mental landscape, opening new pathways I might have previously overlooked. Another important aspect involves the way I interpret uncertainty. Many of us have been conditioned to see ambiguity as risky rather than an opening for discovery. I used to believe that stability equated to safety, which made me resistant to taking calculated risks because I feared losing what little I had. But one key insight changed that perspective. Uncertainty is actually the fertile ground where transformation occurs. When I look at an ambiguous situation, like an investment or a new venture, I choose to see it through a lens of curiosity. Instead of focusing on potential failure, I consider the possibilities of growth. This mindset shift doesn't eliminate risks, but it redefines how I relate to them, transforming perceived threats into opportunities for expansion. It's akin to planting a seed in an unknown patch of soil. Trust in the soil's potential becomes essential. Another layer worth contemplating involves the roles that patience and persistence play in rewiring my internal dialogue. I've learned that shifting long-standing beliefs and habits is akin to sculpting a statue from marble, entirely possible, but requiring time and gentle, consistent effort. Like carving away excess stone to reveal the form within, I must carefully nurture behaviors that support my goals and slowly, over weeks or months, dissolve patterns of doubt. Patience becomes my ally in this process. It encourages me to observe progress not in immediate results, but in subtle, cumulative changes. Each moment I choose gratitude over complaint, confidence over fear, I am etching a new pattern into the fabric of my consciousness, a pattern that, with enough repetition, becomes my new normal. Let me also consider how internal stories shape my emotional energy. Feelings of defeat or frustration are often fueled by mental images I associate with my struggles, images reinforced over time. These emotional states tend to drain my resilience and dim my motivation. Conversely, Cultivating joy and appreciation in everyday moments strengthens my inner resilience. Focusing on what I genuinely value, such as small acts of kindness or moments of peace, ignites a sense of abundance that radiates outward. It acts as a bridge, transforming internal states into aligned actions. When I align my emotional energy with my desires, I find that the universe responds with increased opportunities and resources I hadn't previously noticed. Ultimately, meaningful change hinges on my willingness to confront and reshape the narrative I've told myself for years. This process involves recognizing the automatic mental patterns that hold me hostage and consciously choosing to write a new story, one where prosperity flows freely, where gratitude is the dominant voice. I realize that I am both the author and the reader of my internal script, and I can decide which chapters to emphasize. With each choice to nurture more empowering thoughts, I gently dissolve unseen barriers, opening the door to a reality that's more aligned with my highest aspirations. In this ongoing journey, every tiny shift becomes a building block, each one contributing toward a future where abundance isn't a distant dream, but an everyday experience. Another layer I've come to see is how the stories we tell ourselves shape not only our mindset, but also our ability to attract wealth. It's tempting to believe that prosperity depends solely on external circumstances, luck, market trends, or timing. But beneath that surface lies an undercurrent of internal narratives that either accelerate or block our progress. When I scrutinize my own beliefs about what I deserve or am capable of achieving, I find that many are rooted in long-held convictions that I never properly examined. These stories set invisible boundaries, limits I accept as unchangeable, raising questions about whether true freedom from scarcity exists in the mind as much as in the external world. Our internal stories act as scripts that guide every decision, whether we're aware of them or not. If, for example, I have a subconscious notion that money is scarce or that wealth is tied to sheer luck, I tend to unconsciously validate the idea every time I face an opportunity. I might hesitate or second-guess myself, which silently signals to the universe that I don't believe abundance flows naturally and abundantly. Conversely, cultivating a new story, one that affirms deservingness and opens to infinite possibilities, can shift the energy I project outward, inviting more resources into my life. It becomes clear that narratives rooted in fear or insufficiency act as filters, distorting opportunities by making them seem less accessible than they truly are. Building on this, however, I recognize the tremendous importance of intentionally reshaping these internal stories. When I take deliberate steps to challenge my limiting beliefs, I cast doubt on their authority over me. For instance, if I catch myself thinking, "I'll never be able to save enough," I can replace that with, "Every small step I take compounds into lasting progress." This cognitive reframing begins to dismantle the mental barriers that previously kept me anchored to a scarcity mindset. As I replace old doubts with empowering stories, I start to perceive my reality through a new lens, one that recognizes abundance as a choice, a perspective I can foster daily through conscious attention. Consider how stories influence emotions. If I hold on to a narrative that success is reserved for others, feelings of envy, frustration, or resignation emerge as natural reactions. These emotional states, in turn, reinforce the story, creating a feedback loop that traps me in a cycle of lack. Conversely, adopting a story of worthiness and possibility ignites feelings of confidence, excitement, and gratitude. This emotional recalibration acts as fuel, energizing my actions and sharpening my focus. The internal dialogues I hold in these moments determine whether I see opportunities or setbacks, whether I feel motivated or defeated. When I consciously choose stories that empower, I reinvest my emotional energy into the creation of a more prosperous future. Another crucial aspect is how I interpret setbacks or failures. Instead of adopting the narrative that I am doomed to encounter repeated disappointment, I can frame these experiences as necessary components of growth. Consequently, setbacks transform from signs of inadequacy into vital lessons. These stories add depth to my journey, emphasizing resilience and learning rather than defeat. This mindset not only sustains my motivation, but also reframes my relationship with setbacks, reducing emotional drain. When I shift my internal narrative to view obstacles as stepping stones, I activate a different set of energies aligned with persistence, curiosity, and openness. In doing so, I attract solutions rather than entrapments. Furthermore, I see the power of sharing my new, more empowering stories with others. When I vocalize my goals and intentions, I concretize the mental shifts I am making and affirm my commitment to abundance. It's a form of accountability, an external reinforcement that feeds back into my subconscious. When friends or mentors cheer me on or reflect my passions back at me, I deepen my belief that success is within reach. This social dimension adds a layer of reinforcement, making internal shifts resonate more deeply. The stories I tell in conversation, in journals, or even silently in my mind develop a momentum. They carve new pathways that guide my actions and decisions daily. Ultimately, the internal stories I choose to focus on become the foundational beliefs that shape how I approach every financial opportunity. As I become more conscious of the power stored in these narratives, I understand that consciously rewriting them is an act of true empowerment. It's about manifesting a version of myself who trusts in abundance and recognizes that my inner convictions mirror the outer reality I am creating. The stories I embed into my consciousness will determine whether I view prosperity as a distant dream or as a natural state waiting to unfold. By actively shaping my internal narrative, I forge a new sense of possibility, one where limitless abundance is not an ideal, but a lived experience that I am actively co-creating. When I examine the patterns shaping my mindset, I recognize how the narratives I focus on sculpt my identity and influence daily choices. The conviction that I'm somehow less deserving because of past financial failures can act as an invisible anchor, preventing me from fully embracing opportunities. Such beliefs quietly reinforce a sense of inadequacy, making even small efforts seem futile. Living with that silent voice planting seeds of doubt limits my willingness to step outside comfort zones. It's almost as if I carry a silent weight, and every step toward prosperity feels heavier because my subconscious authentication is rooted in these long-held doubts. But what's truly eye-opening is how these convictions subtly color my perceptions of chance. When I believe success is reserved for others, I interpret opportunities through a lens of scarcity. Perhaps I see a promising job opening, yet dismiss it as out of reach, reaffirming the thought that good fortune is always just beyond my grasp. Conversely, cultivating a mindset of abundance shifts this perception. I begin to notice how every seemingly small chance, whether a new contact, a random idea, or an unexpected opportunity, can serve as a seed for growth. The difference lies entirely in how I frame these moments. Viewing them as potential turning points rather than long shots nurtures an openness that invites more possibilities. Another element I've come to realize is the significance of language in reshaping my experience. Words are not just labels. They resonate on a vibrational level, shaping my emotional climate and thus influencing actions. If I catch myself muttering phrases like, "nothing ever works out," I am essentially echoing a message that reinforces stagnation. Instead, switching to affirmations, like, "I am creating my path," forces me to adopt a different tone internally. This shift isn't just about positive thinking, but about aligning my mental climate with the reality I wish to manifest. When my conversations with myself are rooted in affirmation, my energy naturally elevates, making me more receptive to abundance flowing toward me. The subtle influence of language extends beyond spoken words. It seeps into the tone and posture I carry, impacting how I relate to the world. Now, consider how this approach affects how I frame setbacks. When faced with a disappointment, a missed opportunity, or an unexpected expense, reactions can easily spiral into feelings of defeat. But acknowledging that these moments are passing signals to me that I'm still in control of my story. Viewing challenges as necessary steps in my evolution allows me to extract lessons instead of dwelling on blame or failure. That reframing transforms adversity into a catalyst rather than a block. It's almost like turning rough stone into a jewel. Each bump and flaw unveils something more polished. Shifting the narrative about struggles enhances resilience, enabling me to remain anchored in my intentions and continue attracting resources despite temporary obstacles. Furthermore, the way I interpret repeated patterns matters immensely. If I notice that my thoughts tend to drift toward worry whenever I think about money, I then have an opportunity, not just a problem, to reorient. Instead of allowing anxious feelings to dominate, I can create a deliberate pause and consciously choose a different focus. Perhaps I direct my attention to a moment of gratitude or recall previous instances where opportunities arose unexpectedly. Every time I divert my focus, I am actively crafting a new mental association, a new reference point that doesn't build on fear. The cumulative effect of these conscious redirections shifts my subconscious wiring, gradually replacing a cycle of scarcity with one of possibility. It's like retraining a stubborn muscle. Each small movement matters. Another powerful insight emerges from the notion that beliefs are not static. They adapt based on what I give attention to consistently. The more I reinforce a perspective of abundance, by noticing its presence in small details, the more entrenched this way of thinking becomes. It's similar to planting a garden. Tending to it daily encourages flourishing. If I instead focus constantly on what's missing or what I lack, I risk cultivating despair instead. Therefore, the discipline of consciously amplifying positive perceptions becomes a form of self-education, an ongoing process of rewiring my subconscious for prosperity. Every moment I reflect on what I appreciate, what I value, and what I want to bring into my life acts as fertile soil for growth, fostering a mindset aligned with abundance rather than scarcity. Finally, I realize that reshaping my narrative also involves surrendering the need for immediate validation. Waiting for concrete proof of progress can sometimes create doubt in disguise. Instead, planting myself within a framework of trust allows me to act with conviction, even if results aren't instant. When I fully accept that my actions set the stage for future abundance, I shed the expectation of instant gratification and embrace a more patient, persistent stance. Each deliberate choice, no matter how small, becomes a declaration of my commitment, a declaration that I am actively retraining my subconscious to recognize my worth and potential. Over time, this continuous refocusing helps reshape the core beliefs I hold, opening pathways to prosperity that are fundamentally rooted in this new mindset. When I pay close attention to my habitual thought patterns, I see how they create invisible boundaries that shape my perception of what's possible. An often overlooked aspect is the subtle way certain conditioned beliefs subtly solidify into mental barricades, preventing new ideas from surfacing. For example, if I've long held the idea that only luck determines financial success, I unconsciously filter all my experiences through that lens, giving myself permission to feel powerless or disconnected from control. Without consciously challenging this belief, it functions like an unspoken rule that stifles my creativity and initiative. Recognizing this false narrative is the first step toward dissolving it. It's akin to removing a dusty curtain from a window that's been blocking sunlight for years. Suddenly, I see opportunities one never noticed before, possibilities that seem obvious yet were hidden behind that thick layer of conditioning. Building on this, I understand that the way I interpret setbacks can be a powerful determinant of my subsequent actions. If I interpret adversity as a sign that I'm fundamentally incapable, I reinforce feelings of defeat that inhibit my growth. Conversely, shifting that perspective to see adversity as feedback or a necessary element of mastery transforms the narrative entirely. I begin to view each obstacle as an invitation to adapt and refine my approach, much like an athlete examines their performance to enhance their skills. This reframing fuels resilience, transforming frustration into determination. It enables me to stand taller after setbacks, understanding that failure isn't a final verdict, but a tool for sharpening my focus and expanding my capacity. Another crucial element pertains to the subtle language I use when thinking about money. Words, even when spoken silently, carry a vibration that shapes my emotional state and influences what kinds of opportunities one notice. Phrases like, "I can't afford that," or "it's too expensive," carry a tone of resignation that narrows my sense of possibility. By contrast, choosing to frame inner dialogue around curiosity or potential shifts my energy. Instead of thinking, "I don't have enough," I can ask myself, "What small step could I take today to improve my situation?" This approach ignites a sense of agency, making each choice feel purposeful rather than dictated by external circumstances. Cultivating this mindset becomes an active process of neural rewiring, shifting from a state of passive acceptance to one of inspired action rooted in belief. Now, consider how this shift influences the way I perceive time and progress. When I am anchored in patience and trust, I stop obsessing over immediate results. Instead, I acknowledge that prosperity often unfolds in layers, layered deep beneath surface appearances. Impatience can diminish my ability to recognize signs of growth, like minor wins that accumulate over time. Conversely, embracing patience fosters a sense of gratitude for every small gain, nurturing a fertile environment for larger breakthroughs. When I view my journey as a long-term unfolding, much like a gardener tending to a young tree, I allow myself the space to nurture growth without forcing it. This perspective dissolves the frustration that often accompanies slow progress, replacing it with a gentle confidence that the terrain will evolve once I stay committed. Furthermore, I understand that my perception of worthiness influences how abundant opportunities show up. If I feel undeserving or doubt my ability to sustain wealth once it arrives, I unconsciously create a barrier to receive more. It's comparable to trying to fill a glass that's already cracked. No matter how much water I pour in, it leaks out. Focusing on cultivating a sense of genuine self-appreciation and belief in my capacity to hold abundance acts as a sealant, enabling larger flow. This isn't about vanity or superficial self-love, but about genuinely recognizing my value, imperfections and all, and trusting that I am deserving of continuous growth. When I relate to wealth as a natural extension of my worth, rather than a fleeting privilege, my mindset shifts profoundly. Opportunities aren't seen as rare gifts, but as natural expressions of my aligned energy. Finally, I become acutely aware that sustained change depends heavily on daily actions that reinforce my intentions. Small, consistent choices, whether it's a moment of gratitude, a simple act of kindness, or a mindful breath, can ripple out and reprogram my subconscious to accept prosperity as a normal part of life. It's like planting seeds in a field. Each day's effort contributes to a harvest I might not see immediately, but will definitely feel over time. Overcoming ingrained doubts isn't about eradication in a single sweep, but about cultivating new habits that support my vision. When I honor this process, I empower my mind to gradually adopt a more constructive and abundant outlook, leading me into terrains I previously believed were beyond reach. The transformation takes root slowly, quietly, but with persistent dedication, it becomes the fertile ground upon which future abundance can flourish. Reflecting on this journey so far, I see how each insight intertwines like threads woven into a single, resilient fabric that aims to shield or expose the core of my beliefs. Initially, I might have mistaken my thoughts for mere fleeting impressions, but I now recognize how persistent patterns can shape the landscape of my reality, like unseen currents beneath surface waters that gently, yet persistently, nudged me in certain directions. What's been emerging in my awareness is how the subtle quality of my focus acts as a master architect, constructing either pathways that invite abundance or barriers that block it. Every choice I make in my mental landscape is akin to laying down foundations, delicate, often unnoticed, but profoundly impactful. As I examine the subtle symphony of my prevailing attitudes, I understand that what I unconsciously amplify begins to orchestrate the rhythm of my entire experience. The inner dialogue I tend to default to is not just background noise. It functions as a guiding compass, directing my energy, influencing decisions, and setting the tone for what I welcome into my life. Moving through different phases of this recognition brings with it a sense of agency I might have overlooked. It feels as if I am granted a chance to gently rewire the echoes of my inner voice, tuning them into a melody that resonates with possibility rather than limitation. This act of tuning requires a conscious awareness of the subconscious patterns that have, until now, played behind the scenes, often unnoticed. And from this awareness arises a profound sense of responsibility. I am no longer a passive recipient of circumstances, but an active participant in shaping my inner climate, which directly influences my outer reality. When I begin to see setbacks as part of the larger mosaic of growth, I am invited into a space of deep patience, an acceptance that growth is a nuanced unfolding rather than an immediate transformation. It's as if I'm tending a garden that demands not only effort but also surrender. I must nurture the soil without overstepping, allowing roots to deepen organically. The understanding dawns that the manner in which I interpret and respond to life's rhythms impacts the entire resonance of my being. Every small act of attention, every choice of word, becomes a brushstroke on the canvas of my life's unfolding. The realization expands further. Within the fertile soil of my consciousness, expectations shape the harvest. How I perceive what's possible acts as the blueprint for what manifests in my experience. When I focus on abundance as an intrinsic state, I begin to notice signs everywhere, a subtle confirmation that awareness itself invites manifestation. It's as if I am gradually learning to attune my inner senses to a frequency that, naturally, draws toward me what I hold at the core. This process is neither quick nor superficial. It's a delicate, ongoing calibration, a dance that requires patience and vigilance. Trusting the natural flow becomes less a matter of effort and more an act of surrender to a rhythm that is already within me. In contemplating all of this, I sense the importance of humility. Recognizing how long-standing beliefs can distort perception encourages me to approach this journey with gentle acceptance rather than harsh judgment. There is liberation in understanding that the evolution of my inner landscape might not happen instantaneously, but is nevertheless unfolding steadily beneath the surface. Each moment I consciously redirect my focus, I plant seeds of possibility that, with nurturing, will grow into new attitudes, more aligned with the reality I wish to experience. It's a lifelong process of refinement, a continuous opportunity to redefine what is true and what I am capable of embodying. Ultimately, I feel a sense of empowerment that stems from this realization. The intricate blend of awareness, choice, patience, and trust forms a resilient foundation that no external chaos can easily destabilize. I begin to see that I hold the key not in grand gestures, but in the small, daily shifts that accumulate into a profound transformation. It's as if I am slowly tuning a complex instrument, refining each string until the harmony of my inner world sings clearly and beautifully. With each step, I move closer to embodying a reality that reflects the fullness of my intention, knowing that every conscious turn of my attention shapes the future I am co-creating with the universe. As I move through each day, I come to understand that the true power to redefine my reality resides within my internal landscape. The stories I believe about myself, whether they speak of worthiness, possibility, or scarcity, shape the foundation of every decision I make and every circumstance I encounter. It becomes clear that living consciously requires a gentle, persistent practice of noticing which narratives I am holding onto because they either lift me into expansion or anchor me in limitation. It's an ongoing act of self-awareness, where shifting my focus from doubt to trust becomes as vital as breathing. When I recognize the stories that no longer serve me, I hold the key to rewriting them, crafting new beliefs rooted in possibility instead of fear. What I realize is that, in truth, my thoughts aren't separate from my reality. They are the very fabric of it. Every time I entertain a doubt or cling to frustration, I set the stage for scarcity to seem more real, more imminent. Conversely, when I deliberately choose to invite gratitude and openness into my consciousness, I activate a different kind of energy, an energetic vibration that invites abundance rather than repels it. This isn't about superficial positivity, but about nourishing the core of my belief system with the conviction that I am deserving of good things and capable of receiving them. When I shift the internal dialogue towards affirmation, I begin to construct a mental environment that naturally attracts opportunities and resources. The more I pay close attention to how I speak to myself internally, the more I see that my internal focus serves as a compass, guiding me toward either stumbling blocks or openings. If I cling to stories of inadequacy, I am continually reinforcing a sense of separation from my desires. Conversely, embracing a mindset of trust and appreciation transforms challenges into stepping stones for growth. It's as if I'm planting seeds, each mindful thought that recognizes my potential, Every moment I choose reassurance over worry, as solid soil from which abundance can sprout and flourish. And I understand this isn't a matter of force, but of gentle, consistent tending. The way I choose to interpret my experiences creates ripples that expand outward, influencing the energy I project into the world. From this perspective emerges a profound awareness that the stories I choose to tell about my life determine whether growth feels like an impossible climb or a natural unfolding. When I stop resisting the process and instead invite patience and compassion for myself, I discover that change is often more gradual than I'd like, yet infinitely more profound in the richness it brings. It's through these acts of gentle persistence, recognizing old patterns, consciously shifting my thoughts, and reaffirming my worth, that I cultivate a mental environment ripe for transformation. I see that every small act of kindness toward myself becomes a building block for a more resilient, abundant outlook. The journey becomes less about fixing and more about remembering that I am inherently capable, deserving, and connected to a universe that supports me. The realization that my inner world is the canvas upon which my outer life is painted offers a new level of responsibility and awe. I no longer see myself as helplessly at the mercy of external conditions, but as a co-creator consciously shaping my experience. The stories I hold in my mind act as the brushstrokes, and I am both artist and observer. That awareness awakens a gentle reverence for the profound influence each thought carries. I understand that the most lasting shifts come not with dramatic upheaval, but through tiny, consistent choices, each one a declaration of trust, a step toward peace. With every mindful moment, I reclaim that inner space where my beliefs are crafted, and I recognize how empowering it is to decide which stories I wish to carry forward. In the end, I see that the greatest change occurs when I stop looking outside myself for validation and realize that the foundation of abundance is rooted within. It resides in the stories I tell myself about worth, potential, and the flow of life itself. When I nurture these inner narratives with compassion and conviction, external circumstances begin to mirror that inner harmony. The journey toward prosperity isn't about chasing after it or forcing it into shape. It's about cultivating a fertile internal environment where abundance can naturally blossom. Knowing this ignites a deep sense of trust, a gentle confidence that, by adjusting my inner focus, I am rewriting my story into one of continuous growth, limitless possibility, and enduring fulfillment. And that understanding becomes the true treasure I carry in my heart as I continue walking forward.